And I think tonight's an opportunity to share some ideas. I hope what I'll share will be some fresh insight for you. And then I really hope that you'll speak up and contribute, because it's a bit of a work in progress. But here's a little bit of the background of what I'm about to share with you. When I started out teaching, and I was teaching Torah to really young children, I felt like I had to really come up with the key piece I wanted them to understand. I wasn't going to talk at them for a very long time. So I needed to know, okay, bottom line, what's the message they're going to walk away with? And so it really got me to learn, because if you have to really pull out the key message of something, you got to know it really well. And so I started learning more. As I started teaching less information, I started learning more. And I started to notice that in addition to the very obvious mitzvahs and pieces of learning that I had kind of been used to from all of my years of schooling, there were so many messages in the way things happened in our history, in the way Hashem orchestrated the stories in Torah, that brought out messages that I could implement in my personal life and certainly in my teaching. I started to notice parallels between the way the Mishkan is designed and the way a classroom can be designed. I started to notice the way in which the mitzvahs are categorized, could relate to the different types of instruction that I would give in the classroom. And the list goes on and on. So then when I had the opportunity to look at Pesach through this lens, I started to say, okay, we know this idea that Yetzias Mitzrayim set the stage for everybody to go out of any galus that they experience. Fine. So we know that it's possible. We know you can get out of a galus and things can be good, but how do we do it? What are the messages in the process of Yetzias Mitzrayim that might give me some information about how I could help somebody else leave their Mitzrayim? So I started to go through and look through the psukim, and I kind of created a framework. And as I said, it's a work in progress, but I'll share with you some of the ideas. And then please, anyone who has insights, suggestions, clarifications, I'd love for this to be a shared work. The very first piece that stood out to me in looking at the story is that in order to be able to leave galus, you have to know you're in it. You have to know galus. So the Yidden were in galus for so long, most of them having never experienced Geula, that I'm sure it was uncomfortable, terrible things were happening, but that was their world as they know it. The same thing happens in our classroom. We have students who come to the classroom with various challenges, whether it's learning challenges, whether it's executive function challenges, whether it's coming from a lot of stressful situations at home and having to kind of manage that while also keeping your mind open and able to learn. So many students bring challenges into the classroom, and that is the world that they know. For many of them, that's the only way they've ever been, the only experience they've ever had. So that's life. And if that's life, why would you change it? You're stuck. But when we look at challenges that we experience ourselves, and certainly when we're looking at our students' challenges, we have the opportunity to help them see it as galus. And galus can change. You're not stuck. If there's galus, then there can be geula. So I think the very first step as an educator, when I see a student struggling, I have to recognize that it's a galus. This is not someone being oppositional or someone who's stuck with poor behavior. This is not someone's nature. It doesn't matter the nurture as the first step. This is, as difficult as it is, this is just a galus. And as difficult as it is for me, the person who's living it is having a much harder time, right? We know that people hurt when they're hurting. We are hurtful in our words or our actions because something is happening inside of us that is hurtful. We know that people only struggle because they can't do better, because they don't have the skills to do it differently. So that is the galus. Now we want to take some steps to see, okay, if this is a limitation, what can I do to support the child going through change? How could I help create geula for them? So once you've identified it as a galus, then the student has to identify it that way as well. We have to help our students see that when they're struggling, that they also view this as something that can be temporary. This is something that is changeable. There's a lot of talk about growth mindset. Growth mindset is identifying that you can change and grow. And we know that, right? That is the idea here. This is the current, and I can have a geula mindset and work towards it and move towards a more successful, more positive space. Now, part of that change, even when change is a good thing, right? So picture a student who can't read very well. And so they've always had adapted work. They've always had things differentiated for them. And we want to give them the support to become a better reader. That would be a good thing. They will now be able to access more information more easily. They can feel part of the classroom, but it's a change. And all change is hard, even good change. So picture, going back to the story of Yetzias Mitzrayim, many Yidden did not leave. It was hard. As horrible as things were in Mitzrayim, and as good as it must have sounded when they were told what the promises of Geula were, that's what they knew. That was the life they were used to. And even the Yidden that did leave, they weren't in the midbar for very long before they started showing grief over the fact that they left and sort of shared wishes for going back, because change is hard. So it might mean that, wow, now I'll be a better reader, but I'm going to have a whole lot more work. Is it worth it? These kind of doubts come up in our minds. I'm going to have something good, but there's definitely going to be something that comes along with it. I might just want things to stay as they are. Status quo feels safe. It feels good. So we'll identify galus and try to recognize that that's all we're experiencing. And also know that even if we're headed in a good direction, there's going to be some dissonance. There's going to be some pushback, internal, whether I as the teacher might be struggling with that change process because it won't happen so systematically, or the child is struggling. That's part of the process. There were a lot of bumps along the way of Yetzias Mitzrayim. I think one more point about the recognizing the galus before we move into the geula piece is that Moshe Rabbeinu really was exempt from the galus, right? He was from Shevet Levi. He wasn't even in that land. He really could have gotten away with not being involved and not really. Maybe he would have come in, swooped in, told everybody it's time to pack up and go, right? It could have worked that way. But Hashem created this model where the leader had to first feel the people's pain. He had to go back and he had to see people being hurt. He had to see the difficulty, and he had to get to know it, to feel compassion for them, and then to be able to truly be their leader. And so when we look at our own classrooms and we see these children that are struggling with their personal galus, we have to know what that feels like. I recently had a parent who I was meeting with, whose child was struggling in many ways in the classroom. And she said, I wonder if the teacher even realizes how difficult every moment of the day is for my child. And I thought, wow, you know what? Often we want to fix things, want to make it better, but do we step into the child's shoes first? Do we know what it looks like for them or how it feels? If you're familiar with the work of Rick Lavoie, he used to do this whole workshop about how you could kind of feel what some learning differences are like. You could feel what it's like to read if you're dyslexic. You could feel what it's like to try and sit still if you've got, if you've got hyperactivity. How does this galus feel for my student? Because in order to get them to be willing to let go of it and move forward, I need to step into their shoes and feel it a little bit myself. I have to try and recognize what is it for them. And then we get to look at the prettier picture. So I got a sense for what the not great picture is. Now I want to identify what the geula looks like. The Yidden weren't asked just to pick up, move. This was not Lech Lecha. We have that in Torah. We have the opportunity to learn to just pick up and leave because you were told to. But that's not what happened in Mitzrayim. Hashem told us where we were going. Very specifically, we knew what geula would look like. It was described to us and identified. And so if we want children to break through, whether it's in their behavior, in their learning, in their social dynamics, we need to help them see what that's going to look like. What is the goal? Where do we want them to go? Is it a really big geula we're bringing them to? Is it maybe step-by-step incremental geulas that we're identifying for them? But we need to be very clear about where we're going to try and take them, and then also remember to tell them, to help them map it out, or at least help them see what it could look like. You're really struggling with learning this many psukim right now. That's hard. I think you can get to the place where you can learn all the psukim the class is learning. We're not there yet, but let's identify. That's going to be your geula. Or maybe it's writing is so hard for you, you can barely get out 2 sentences. We're going to get you to being able to write an essay. It's not going to be our first stop, But that's ultimately where we're headed. And you're not going to do it by yourself. So, Eighth Day has that great song, there's a little bit of Moses in me. Well, that's us as teachers, right? We've got a little bit of Moshe Rabbeinu in us. And Hashem didn't just have all the Yidden wake up one day and all the Mitzrayim were dead. That could have happened. I don't know if that's harder than the Makkais, right? Like Hashem can do anything. Could have woken up one day, all the Mitzrayim were dead, the Yidden picked up and left, went to Eretz Yisrael. Game over. But he didn't. He created this incredible model, and there was a leader in it. There was a leader that helped the Yidden through the process. And that's our role in the classroom. We help identify the galus, we help identify the gula, and then we say, I'm coming with you. I'm going to be there every step of the way. And if there's bumps, we'll bump it up together, right? If there's struggles, or if it goes a little bit differently than we expected, I'll be there to be your guide, and we'll figure it out together. And as part of that figuring out together, I think there's two more pieces that we can pull from the Pesach story. And that is, the Yidden started to experience Geula bit by bit while they were still in Mitzrayim. So the hard work stopped before they left. They had a little bit of a break. They weren't home free, but they stopped working so hard. They got some mitzvahs. So now they could start to build their connection to Hashem in a different way than before. They could start to experience what it's like to be Yidden that are connecting to Hashem through mitzvahs. Little by little, they started to get a taste for what that end goal would be like. It was like creating milestones for them. So they'd keep working towards it. So they'd keep being open to the change and moving in the right direction. And I think when we're encouraging our students to grow and change, we have to create milestones too. Taking huge leaps is really scary and maybe often too overwhelming. But if we can create a goal and then along the way identify, okay, so you were having trouble with those 2 sentences and I want to get you to an essay, we're going to start with a paragraph. And maybe next we'll get 2. Or maybe we were working on a test and you got 3 out of 10. And I wish you had gotten all of them right. But before we go to 10 out of 10, wow, you completed the entire test. You put an answer down for each one. Mind you, 7 of them were wrong. That doesn't matter. We're identifying the milestones that bring us closer to a geula. The geula is you're going to finish the whole test. Let's first identify that you finished the whole test. And soon we'll get to doing it all correctly. Next, I'll identify that you did 5 out of 10. Just highlighting and celebrating those milestones that give us geula-dic experiences. And then if we look, we see that Hashem made lots of miracles for us. Yetzias and Mitzrayim, right? We had all these miracles during the process. Were they necessary? I don't know. Again, we could have just been picked up and put on clouds and would have landed in Eretz Yisrael, and the process would have been over. And in Mirz Hashem, that should happen for all of us, and all of our process should be over very easily and simply in Eretz Yisrael with Mashiach. But in the story of Yetzias Mitzrayim, Hashem encouraged us all along the way. He recognized the difficulty of the situation and this major change we would be going through, and he offered us encouragement and support in many ways, obviously providing everything we needed, creating the school experience, but he encouraged us with miracles so that we would stay inspired, so that we would be willing to continue on from our own volition rather than just because we had to or because that's what happened to us. And I think the same thing is needed for students when we're encouraging them to grow. What are the miracles I can make for my students in my classroom? What are the ways that I can encourage them? What are the ways that I can boost connection with them during this process? Or ways that I can support them? Maybe it's lowering the expectations a little bit so they can feel success, even though really where I want them to feel success is at a much higher level, but we'll do it step by step. What are those miracles that they can feel and celebrate so that they stick with this difficult process? So those were some of the ideas I pulled out. And then just because I wanted to really push myself to keep thinking this way and use it, I made a little framework, which I'll share with you. This is nothing incredible, just a little bit of a worksheet that I believe Nether will use in working with students. And it was something that I feel like I will pull out when I'm thinking about a student who may be struggling, and just gave myself a little template. What is that galus? And then I think I would do the first box the first box. I'll skip to the bottom and do the last box. Next, what's the personal geula, and then identify what are those milestones, what are those Isais and Mifs and the encouragement and support that I can offer along the way. And Mirta Shem, that will be ways that we can pull from the original Yetzias Mitzrayim to help ourselves and our students with their many Yetzios Mitzrayim. So that's as far as I got. If any of you were sparked with inspiration of things you'd add or details or tweaks, I'd love to hear it. And if you have a challenge that you're struggling with, that maybe we can actually look at the framework and try to work on together, I'd love to do that in a few minutes we have left.